Okay, so Feminist International Political Economy is about gendered power relations. But what is gender? Here I want to turn to V. Spike Peterson's very good article in New Political Economy, I think it was, from 2005, where she makes the distinction between the categories of or approaches of empirical gender or two understandings of gender, empirical understanding of gender and analytical understanding of gender. This by Peterson's article is already almost 20 years old, but I still find this distinction very, very helpful in my own work, as well as when I supervise my students, for instance. So you often see feminist scholarship in political economy or in any other fields that take on the view that gender marks the hierarchy between the binary categories of men and women. These days, a lot of us would probably recognize that this is somewhat old-fashioned perspective, maybe, to gender, knowing that gender is actually not a binary category. But nevertheless, this empirical understanding of gender is still alive and well in policy documents, for instance. You can take almost any United Nations organization document and look how they approach gender. You can take, Sustainable Development Goals and look how gender is understood there. It's often about improving the lives of women and children, women and girls. So this empirical understanding of gender understands gender as hierarchy between the categories of men and women. And then, not only that, there is often focus on women's and girls' disadvantaged position in society, as in the United Nations discourse, for instance. Sometimes, of course, there might also be a focus on men and boys. And I think there should be more focus on men and boys as well, as when gendered politics is discussed. These kind of perspective sometimes leads to policies where we lump together categories such as women and children, or political talks about political representation, for instance, where we just simply add women to politics and then stir, and then it's somehow gender mainstreamed. This is not to say that these kinds of studies would not be important. It is still a fact in the world that in many ways, women and girls, or those identified as women and girls, or other feminized groups in society, are disadvantaged in politics and society in various ways. However, to only take this empirical view of gender is rather limited if we want to understand all the multiple ways in which gendered power relations, gendered and sexualized power relations shape the world and the politics and the economics therein. Right. So Peterson's second category, or what she said that is second or another understanding of gender, is a bit more in depth. She calls it the analytical understanding of gender. And here, gender is understood as a governing code that shapes the ways things are valued in society. And this really then, suddenly, we don't, like in my own work, I rarely look at things that are about people defined as women. I look at things that are about I analyze things that are categorized as feminized or feminine or masculine, and I look at the power relations between those two. So this kind of allows us to analyze, make gendered analysis not only of human life, but about practices, about appreciation of some things and needs rather than others. Compared, think about toilets rather than incontinence pads, which one of those would be the kind of more feminine way of taking care of your own hygiene needs, whether you identify yourself as a woman or man or anything else. This being said, I have to also at this point remind you that my first language is not English. And sometimes when I teach about gender and sexuality, either in Finnish, which is my first language, or in English, I get a bit stumbled with my words. I don't always use the right terminology, particularly because lots of our mindsets are really stuck with the binary understanding of the world through the categories of men and women. While at the same time, or I get stumbled with pronouns, he, she, they. It sometimes feel rather complicated. And don't get me wrong, I think it's very important to pay attention to these issues. But if I do say something wrong during this lecture, please be kind, because, for instance, in my first language, Finnish, there is only one pronoun for he and she. That's han, and then that's one field of getting stumbled. And then, of course, I do still get a bit stumbled. First of all, just with English language. So if my gendered language doesn't make justice to your feminism, or it feels that it's not equally inclusive or adequately inclusive, then I first of all want to apologize. I do try and be as inclusive as possible, but sometimes it's really hard to operate on one's second language with issues that are really rather complicated. So this is kind of just a disclaimer. So to wrap up, V. Spike Peterson argues that there are actually two different approaches to gender in the study of international political economy. And even though this is an old argument, 20-year-old argument, I still think that it holds true. So first of all, there is the empirical understanding of gender, and then there is analytical understanding of gender. And in the analytical understanding of gender, gender is understood as a governing code that shapes the way things are valued. It focuses on hierarchies, not so much between, or not necessarily between men and women, but hierarchies between things that are coded as masculine and feminine. And it is argued that things that are, and when you start looking around in the world with this view, you realize that things that are coded as masculine are much more valorized in society, and particularly in political economy, particularly in political life and economic life, and in sort of hard economics. Whereas things that are coded as feminine are devalorized. They are understood as something that are just natural, relations of care, caring practices, the body, emotions. They are something that are not fully to be taken seriously in the field of politics and economics. Reproductive labor, something that kind of maintains and sustains human life. It's something that it's not really that. It's always that which kind of only takes money, but it doesn't produce. Whereas productive economy, something where we produce items and innovations and something that can be sold, is understood as much more masculine and valorized, and so on and so forth. Other dichotomies. So really, when we take on this analytical approach to gender, we start to realize how not only is the world follow the dichotomy where women and men or categories of women and men are differentially valued. But from the analytical perspective, we start to realize that the world and our language system and our value systems are ordered in these dichotomies where there is always first is the masculine and the second is the feminine. Say rational, emotional, mind. Oh, that's, that's valuable. But the body, something a bit too natural, something you shouldn't really talk about, or at least consider political, rather, and let alone economically somehow relevant. Public, private, public sphere of political decision making, private sphere of the household, where we don't even count for those things still that take place. The economically valuable things that take place within the household, they don't really count for the GDP. And so on and so forth. Productive labor as opposed to reproductive labor, and so on. So, to wrap up, we have now learned about the empirical approach to gender and analytical approach to gender. And we have learned that feminist international political economy is about the study of gendered and sexualized power relations in international political economy. We have learned that the personal is political. The good old slogan is still alive and well in feminist international political economy approaches. And it really means that because personal is political, there is a whole diversity of relevant approaches in the field of international political economy. And because of the diversity, and because personal is political, we need to ask always whose personal is relevant in our understanding of the international political economy. Then this also means that there are various different kinds of gender discourses in the organization of international political economy. And sometimes it is quite possible for us as scholars, for various actors, various economic actors in the political sphere of global life to kind of co-opt gender and sexuality discourses. And one of such instances is what international feminist political economy scholars such as Adrian Roberts has called Invest in a Girl discourse. Here is one video that I want you to look at, and then just consider the question like, what happens in this video and what sort of gender discourse takes place in this video, and how is gender and our understanding of gender, how is it utilized for economic purposes in this video?